Welcome to Don't Quote Me on That. One day we will have an intro, but today is not that day.
Hello, hello, hello. I'm Kalina, and welcome back to Don't Quote Me on That, where we kind of talk about movies. I'm alone again, and I will save you my usual spiel about when I'm alone, about my slacker of a co-host Eleanor, and how she always does this to me, how you can't take her anywhere, literally, because she's not here right now to record with me. But I feel like I've said that enough times, so who needs to hear it again? Also, just in advance, if you hear any bells tinkling away like this, I have a kitten who's decided it's playtime at 10 p.m., so forgive me. This week, here on Don't Quote Me on That, we kind of talk about movies. And technically, I am kind of talking about a movie because I'm talking about a book that was made into a movie. And honestly, that's the closest we've been in a while to a movie. So, yay for me. But as everyone knows, I'm the resident... Well, I don't know if everyone knows this, but I'm the resident book reader here on Don't Quote Me on That, because Eleanor, you all know that Vine that's like, what's up, my name's Jared, I'm 19, I never learned how to read. That's Eleanor. Eleanor knows how to read, but like, I have not seen proof of that recently, is what I will say. So, this year my goal was to read 50 books, and not to keep bringing up Eleanor, but Eleanor was like, I'll help you out with that. I'll read one, because my mom said she was going to read half. And then we got to like March, and my mom hadn't even read one book. So basically my mom was like, I'll read 25, you read 25. Boom, that's 50. And we got to March, and she hadn't even finished one book. So I wasn't like terribly confident in her pulling through with the 25 books. So I had Eleanor, or I got Eleanor to come in on it. And Eleanor was like, I'll read one book. I don't think that's happened either. So moral of the story is I'm reading 50 books this year. But what I've really been trying to do, because this year is like the first time I've gotten like back into reading since I want to say middle school probably. I used to read a lot and I really liked it. And I mostly read like fantasy, I think. Like I do like a yearly Percy Jackson reread. Not even on purpose. It's just like once a year I'm like, oh man, I really like the Percy Jackson books. And I just want to reread them because they're one of the few things I can like, I guess consume. But like, specifically books. Read over and over again without... That's not the right sentence. That's not the right word. The Percy Jackson series is one of the few things I can like read over and over again. I'll still laugh at it like out loud like the first time I read it. So every once in a while I'll be like, I want to read Percy Jackson. So I'll start at the beginning, obviously. And then that just kind of spirals into me rereading the whole series. And I breeze through them because I've read them so many times. But like they're just as enjoyable every single time. So, side note, very excited for that TV show, and when it comes out, I will do my best to watch it and make Eleanor watch it, and we can talk about it. But if not, and if there's ever a solo episode after it comes out, I will chit-chat about the Percy Jackson show. But, all of that aside, so, I read a lot when I was younger, and then, like, obviously high school and, like, especially college, you do a lot of reading for class, and you've got, like, a lot of things to write, so, like, reading's, like, the last thing you want to do in your free time, even if it's for fun. And so, like, I put away a couple books here and there over those years, and like I enjoyed the reading we did in class. Like we read The Great Gatsby when I was in high school, and I liked The Great Gatsby. I think it gets a bad rap. We read Of Mice and Men. I liked Of Mice and Men, but like I never really got to like sit down and read for fun like I used to. So this is the first year since high school and college that I've really been able to read for fun. And so what I'm trying to do is diversify my reading palette, I suppose, in that I try not to read the same genre back to back. So like if I read a fiction, I'll read like a biography next, or like like a different type of fiction. Like what we got: literary fiction, historical fiction, things like that. A mystery, like just something slightly different than what I read. So far this year, I can actually tell you I've read 21 books, maybe 22, because I did read a couple, maybe 22 or 23, because I know I read a couple books like physically. So I'm almost halfway, actually, which is, like, not great because it is August, but also June and July, like, weren't great reading months for me. I read, like, I think 2 books in June. I don't think I finished a single book in July. But then take, like, January, I read, like, 6 books. So, like, I'm just expecting maybe, like, August I'm getting this month, and September specifically. I think I'm going to get back into it, so I think I've got a lot of books put away then. So, still holding out for that 25 for the rest of the year. Wish me luck. All of that to say this, I'm reading a lot more. I'm trying to diversify. So I was trying to read, a classic. I'm trying to throw some more classics in there because I feel like I don't know enough. I mentioned The Great Gatsby of Mice and Men, but like those are for class, so I don't really like go to read classics or go out of my way to read classics. So I've been trying to throw one or two in there when I can. And the classic I'm talking about today, as I'm sure you all know from the title, is To Kill a Mockingbird. And I want to start off by saying I had no idea what this book was going into it because again, it's a classic. It's not something I like looked up the description for, the plot summary of. But like the things I knew about To Kill a Mockingbird going in was Atticus Finch, Boo Radley. There was a black guy on trial for something he didn't do, right? Those were the 3 points of information I had, genuinely. And so the whole time, okay, before I read this book, I would have sworn up and down that Boo Radley was the black guy that Atticus Finch was defending. And in case you haven't read To Kill a Mockingbird, I'm sorry to spoil this for you, but that's not the case at all. Boo Radley is this like completely other fella who we don't even meet till the end of the book. I'm sorry. This is going to be a spoiler. This is not going to be spoiler free, okay? I mean, it's going to be lots of spoilers, so if you haven't read or seen To Kill a Mockingbird and you would like to remain in suspense, tune out now. However, I think getting spoilers for books, for the most part, unless it's like one, like the big reveal at the end, it's very rare it like ruins the thing. Whereas I think it's more likely to ruin it in a movie or a TV show. I'm sorry. My cat's just decided it's romping time. And he is having a blast looking at his reflection in the mirror. But yeah, so this is going to have spoilers. But yeah, we don't meet Boo Radley till the end. He's some white guy who's just shut up in his house who like is just a character in... I like when media does this. When you have a character that's very present, but you never actually see them. And sometimes it's done well, and sometimes it's done very poorly. Like, you know, especially like the wife trope, or like the girlfriend, like the protagonist is trying to get back to. We never really see, or even like when they're dead, because they love that, you know, the dead wife trope. But like the dead wife is such a presence and such a driving force for this male character, usually. Or like mother, you know, for the male character, that she's like almost a character of her own, even though we've never actually met her. But anyway, that's kind of Boo Radley, except he's not dead and not a woman. So I just wanted to chit chat a little bit about To Kill a Mockingbird. I don't think there is much I can say about To Kill a Mockingbird that hasn't been said already. That is the problem with tackling a classic. But just some thoughts I had, some like little tidbits, some quotes. I liked this a lot more than I thought it was. I was really worried I was going to find this really boring. That's my cat says hello, everybody. I was really worried I was going to find this really boring, and I didn't. I really enjoyed it, and it's not what I thought it was at all. So I think that helped it be interesting to me. It was a lot more, first of all, I wasn't expecting it to be so pleasant and enjoyable, and I didn't realize it was about Scout, this young girl, the main character, the narrator's life. I thought it was going to be using Scout to like tell this story, which it does, but it's very much, you know, sometimes you'll have like a childlike, or child literally, but like a very naive kind of separated character from the events narrate the story, but really we're learning specifically about the other characters. We don't learn much about Scout. Scout's kind of like, or it's not a Scout, but the narrator, whoever the person is, will be kind of like we're looking through their eyes. So we never really like look within. Whereas Scout, we looked within mostly. And it was just these things that she experienced as a girl growing up. And I thought overall it was a story about family. And how family is not just blood, because they had this friend Dill who used to come, and he said he was going to marry Scout, but he used to come every summer and hang out with her and her brother. And they had, you know, their housekeeper, who, I'll be honest, I feel like if I say her name, I'm going to jack it up, so I'm not going to. But their housekeeper, and like even Scout's aunt that she didn't like, but like all these people who came into their lives, Miss Maudie, one of their neighbors across the street, these people who came into their lives and like really picked up, and even though they had a dead mother, and in turn Atticus had a dead wife, Atticus, their father, had a dead wife, I forgot that was a plot point, you know? It was brought up maybe once or twice, once at the beginning, and then I know 2 times towards the end, they were like, oh yeah, my mother died. And I was like, oh, I forgot that's what happened to her. Because, like, it never felt like there was this gap in their lives that you're sitting there going, where's their mom? Like, why is no one else taking care of them? Or even, like, later in the story, the kids go down to the courthouse to see Atticus defend Tom Robinson, who's the black man accused of raping a young white woman. And that's kind of like, you know, the main crux of the third part. I'd also say this story is broken into the third part. So that's kind of like the third part of the story. And they can't find any seats, and they don't want Atticus, their father, to know they're there. And so they end up getting taken in by the colored group. So their seating is upstairs because, you know, this is taking place in the 1930s. And so, like, the reverend of their housekeeper's church lets them sit with him. So, like, these people who took them in and know they're part of the community, especially because of the work their father's doing, but, like, these people who, like, look after their own because it's the right thing to do. And then kind of backtracking a little bit in terms of, like, the character who's not present but is still a very integral, moving, driving force of the story. We have Atticus Finch, who's their kid's father, and he's this lawyer, and all around he's a good man. And kind of how you can see his presence and his effect on his children's lives, even though most of the day he's gone at work and he comes home in the evening and he reads with them and they have dinner together. But, like, for most of the hours, they are alone to their own devices. And Atticus is still such a foundational part of them. I don't want to say integral again. He's such a formative part of themselves. Obviously, he's their dad, but, like, just the way they handle things and reflect back on. Sometimes I think when you react to something, it'll be your instinct, and then maybe you'll think on it later and be like, oh, I learned this from my mother, right? Whereas it's especially Scout several times, like, she wanted to get in a fight, but she would think even in the moment, this is not what Atticus would want. This is not, like, what he's taught me, so I won't do it, you know? So I thought that was impressive. And then also, like, Atticus in the larger sense of Atticus as a pillar of the community, and Atticus as what's a good word? Atticus as a reflection or a potential for the community, like what they could be capable of if they let their best selves win. And this kind of, I thought that was glad I thought of that, because when I was reading up a little bit on this book to record this episode, I saw that Harper Lee, the author of To Kill a Mockingbird, released one other book, which was called Go Set a Watchman, which turns out to be a first draft of To Kill a Mockingbird. And the title comes from Isaiah 21:6 in the Bible that says, For thus hath the Lord said unto me, Go set a watchman, let him declare what he seeth. And the idea was, or the conception was, that Atticus is this watchman or this moral compass, not just for his children, but for the city of Macomb overall, where they live. Macomb, Alabama, by the way. So, like, it is a fictional city, but Alabama's obviously very real. You know, we are living in Great Depression South, you know, from 1933 to 1935. Like, there's one quote in the book where Miss Maudie, who's one of their neighbors they spend a lot of time with, and she kind of dotes on them, I'd say, says, like, whether Macomb knows it or not, we are trusting Atticus, or, like, we're holding him at a very high honor, something like that. Like, we are trusting him to do what's right in terms of defending Tom Robinson, because but the people of Macomb were not very thrilled that Atticus was, even though it was court appointed, they weren't thrilled that Atticus is going to do his best to defend this guy. Oh, also, side note, okay, because a lot of people, the other thing I knew, there was a fourth secret thing I knew about To Kill a Mockingbird, which is they use the N-word a lot, which is true. And usually that bothers me because I feel like it's excessive. Whereas here, like, it really wasn't. There was a couple of times I was like, I feel like we're laying it on a little thick. But, like, given the context and also the fact that this was written in the 60s, it's based off of Harper Lee's, like, real life growing up during the 30s. Unfortunately, it's not surprising. That's how people talked. I can imagine she even toned it down, and that's what was left. So, just a little side note. But anyway, people aren't glad he's defending him. And they're like, if Atticus was just defending him because it was his court-appointed duty, that'd be fine. But it's the fact that they know he's going to do his best rather than just going through the motions. But at the same time, they are trusting him to do this, which is the highest honor that can be bestowed. Anyway. All of that said to say, Atticus is kind of this moral compass. And again, kind of back to the idea of family. The city of Maycomb in its own right is a family. Not necessarily a functional one, but if we're simplifying things into tropes and definitions such as that, we have the Finch family, so Atticus and Jem and Scout and Kalina, I believe is their housekeeper's name. I decided to give it a go. But like this little group. But then also Atticus is also somehow at the center of the Maycomb, Alabama family. This village, this town that's going through it. There's hard times. There's separation. There's discrimination. There's prejudice. And Atticus is kind of not only trying to be a driving force, but also raise driving forces through his children. In terms of Scout, who I feel I haven't talked about a lot, even though she is the narrator, she's between the ages of 7 and 9 as this book progresses. And I think this is a very brilliant decision. Again, I'm sure someone out there has said this. That's the problem with, a classic is, to be fair, for the most part, everything that's been said has been said before, and everything that's been done has been done before. But Scout being so young explains why this book was broken up in a way I wasn't expecting, in the sense that we spend the first part of the book talking about Boo Radley and how they used to try to figure out who Boo Radley was and throw rocks at his house and go sneaking in. You're like, okay, this is all gonna come to a head. This is gonna be this is where the climax is gonna come from in the story. And then after they get bored of Boo Radley, we don't really hear about him again. Then we kind of move on to, Scout's in school and we're in this little transition period and trouble she's having with the beginnings of her father, or the beginnings of the repercussions, so to speak, for Scout and Jem, because their father is defending Tom Robinson. And kind of the third part of the story is then the actual case with Tom Robinson, the climax, this nice little conclusion that I also really appreciate didn't wrap things up in a nice little bow and was here's the moral. The moral was throughout. It was clearly stated. It was subtly stated. But the book being broken up in that way makes sense with Scout's age, because a little kid can't isn't gonna stew on things, so to speak. So Tom Robinson, again, there's spoilers. Tom Robinson ends up getting shot when he's in prison, because he's trying to escape, because he knows he's not going to get a fair appeal. And we touch on this, and how there's another quote in the book that I like, even though it is very sad. It says, Tom Robinson was a dead man the moment Mayella Ewell, who was the girl who accused him of raping her. It says, Tom Robinson was a dead man the moment Mayella Ewell opened her mouth and screamed. So, no matter which way he spun it, Tom Robinson would have not had a good life, or a fair life, or a happy life after that happened. Especially because if you think about it, he lost the case, okay? And Atticus, says, okay, we're going to appeal. But we know that even if he went to appeal, that wouldn't have gone well. And even if he had won the case by some miracle, what kind of life would Tom Robinson have had in that town, where everyone believes that just because of the color of his skin, he did this awful, heinous thing, And obviously it's not everyone. But the vast majority, the majority that has power and say and influence, would never so much as give him the time of day. His life would be in danger. His family's life would be in danger. So that's the sort of thing, if you had an older narrator, or Atticus, who's directly involved in it, or something like that, who can understand the repercussions and all the things that kind of roll into Tom Robinson being accused, and then his I don't want to say unfair, but unfair trial, and then his eventual death that would have been a very, very large, to keep it simple, a very large part of the story. Whereas because Scout's just a kid as she's 9 and as she gets older in the book, she like kind of starts to recognize the injustices. Like at one point she talks about how in class her teachers complain about Hitler, but then that same teacher or those same peers in her classroom will turn around and complain about the black people in their town. And she goes, I don't get it. Like, how can you hate Hitler so much, but then turn around and be ugly to people in your own home? And she also says to her, and her brother is like, he's a little older. He's like about almost 13 or something. He's like, don't one day, Scout, when you get older, you'll understand. And Scout's like, no, I think there's just one kind of folks, and that's folks. And like the rest of it doesn't make any sense to her. So while she's starting to realize that there's injustices, I don't think the full weight of that and the full impact of said injustices is weighing down on her. So again, I think it's a very, very good choice to have a young narrator in this scenario, because you can still tackle these issues and bring them up and make a point without making it overwhelmingly depressing, because I was expecting this book to like make me angry. You know, sometimes you read something and you're like, yes, I know injustice exists in the world, but sometimes to be confronted with it in that way, you feel it as though you're witnessing it in real life. So I never felt depressed like that. I'd say I almost felt more motivated. You know, the overall feeling I had was more positive than negative. And not to like bring my personal life experience into this, but the quote about Hitler and Scout saying how can you hate Hitler for discriminating against the Jews, basically, but you're going to turn around and be ugly to people in your own hometown, right? Made me think of when I was living in Slovakia, and the people there, you know, you've got a group of people known as the travelers, and the people in Slovakia do not like the travelers. I find, and this is just my personal experience, so forgive me if you disagree and don't like my choice of words, but I find the Slovak people to be very hostile towards the travelers, and they have nothing nice to say about them. But then, like, if I would talk about racism or, like, something like that would come up, you know, to, like, specifically to black people, let's say, they would be like, yeah, that's awful. Like, I don't understand how you could treat someone like that. And I'm like, but, like, how you treat the people who live in your own country is how people treat black people who live in their country. And, like, they just could not fathom the connection between those two things. And so, I don't know, they say not even hindsight is 20/20. I just guess when it's in your face, you don't realize it because you're like, well, it's different. You got all this context. But, like, at the end of the day, you're being awful to people just because they belong to a specific group of people. But, I don't know, maybe if you had a different experience, anyone from Slovakia or who has been to Slovakia, just let me know. Like, I found that really shocking and almost kind of disheartening, because I had a really good experience overall in Slovakia. And that was like, there was two things, and that was one of the two things that like turned me off or left like a bad taste in my mouth, you know? And kind of to center back on Atticus again, then Atticus and the tone of the book overall is very brass tacks. It's like, yes, these things are awful. Yes, unfortunately they happen, but it doesn't have to depress us or demotivate us. It just is a fact of life. And then I also kind of had this thought of like Atticus as Steve Rogers, Captain America, in the sense that one of my favorite quotes is from that is, you have to be who you are, which is not a perfect soldier, but a good man. And Atticus is not a perfect lawyer. He's not a perfect father. He, you know, his sister constantly criticizes him for how he's raising his children. He's like, I'm doing my best. I am trying to raise children that I am proud of. One time he says, before Jem looks at anyone else, he looks at me, and I've tried to live so I can look squarely back at him. So he knows his kids are watching him. He knows he has to set a good example, and it's not just talk. So he may not be perfect, or even if he's not perfect by his standards, but Atticus might not be perfect, be it by his standards, or society standards, or his family standards, or whoever's standards, but he's good, and he's moral, and he's kind. And I would argue those things are more important. And then it also kind of made me, in a completely different vein, it made me think about the quote, "Your father is only your father until one of you forgets." Because one, like, key aspect of Atticus's relationship with his children is they don't call him dad or father or anything. They call him by his name, so they call him Atticus. They refer to him as Atticus, which, if I read that anywhere else, I would find that very rude. I don't think kids should call any adults by their first name. But, but Scout and Jem call everyone else in town Miss Maudie, Miss Rachel, Miss Stephanie. They use the proper terms, but their father is always Atticus. And especially because of the age, but just because of what the story is about, we get these moments where Scout is realizing her father is not just her father. Her father is this man who had a life before them and who isn't just walking the walk and talking the talk because he has children to teach, but because that is who he is as a person, and he does as he says, which not everyone does. Like, for example, there's this very poignant scene where they have to call Atticus out to shoot a sick dog, and Jem and Scout are confused because they're like, this is not the father we know, this is not the Atticus we know. But everyone else is like, did no one ever tell your father was known as, I think he was Deadeye Finch, like he could shoot anything from any distance very accurately. But Atticus doesn't like violence and he's opposed to it. And at one point, Scout says something like, it was times like this where I thought my father, who opposed guns and had never been to war, was the bravest man I knew. And I don't think that's it directly in relation to that, but just that concept of your father being someone you can look up to, not just as your parent, but just as a person. Again, if I had one takeaway that I really want to drive home in this, is that To Kill a Mockingbird is a story about family and the different ways it presents itself and it manifests, even if it doesn't seem like that, because I think you gotta kind of come along on a ride with me to realize, or to see what I'm saying. But I think if you've read the book, and just even the last lines of the book, again, spoilers, okay, if you haven't left yet, but at the end of the book, the kids get attacked, and Boo Radley, this recluse who they kind of made friends without realizing they were making friends with, which is just a lot of stuff I won't get into now, rescues them, because this guy is trying to murder them to get back at Atticus for defending Tom Robinson, right? And so Boo Radley comes out and saves him and ends up killing the guy instead. And so Jem is got a broken arm and he's lying in bed all up on medication. He's just knocked out. Atticus is sitting by his bed reading, waiting for him to wake up. And the last line in the book is, he would be there all night, and he would be there when Jem waked up in the morning. And to me, that almost made me want to cry, because, again, Scout's realizing her father's not just her father's this man. But at the end of the day, her father is, first and foremost, her father. Atticus could be a lawyer. He could be the moral compass of of the county they live in. But at the end of the day, his first priority, his first concern, his first responsibility is being a good father to his children. And in his attempts to do that, I think he also becomes a good man. So, I don't know. I really like To Kill a Mockingbird. I wasn't expecting to like it so much. What else? I read a couple other classics. Why can't I remember? Oh, I read Dracula and I read Frankenstein. And I was expecting to really like Dracula. And I was like, it's alright. It felt a little long to me. And then I wasn't expecting Frankenstein. And I loved Frankenstein. I thought it was fantastic. And then I read To Kill a Mockingbird. So I was like, okay, this is gonna go one of two ways. And I also thought it was a really long book. And just I was like, I don't really want to read about racism, because I know that exists, and I'm a bit of escapist to reality. That's my purpose for reading, So I don't know. I thought this was genius. I would put it on the list of, I agree, I know this is probably on a lot of these lists of books you should read before you die. I would definitely concur with this being on there. I know there's a lot of controversy about it in schools and stuff. First because of the N-word, but now for a variety of other reasons. especially in good old Florida. Love living here. I do. But, there's always progress to be made, is what I will say, and I will leave it at that. And so anyway, I think everyone should check this out. I feel like I'm like sponsoring a product. To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Get it wherever you get books now. Like, I don't have a promo code or anything. It's a good book. If you're thinking of picking up a classic or trying to just, feel like you're a more refined and well-read reader, this is a good book to go with. I don't think it's not boring, it's not lofty, it's still relevant, it's interesting, it's engaging. Read To Kill a Mockingbird. I have been Kalina. That little bell jingling around that you hear has been my cat, who I got a couple weeks ago while I was in the middle of this book, and I named him after Atticus Finch. Maybe that's why I talked about Atticus so much. I liked Atticus as a character, but I wasn't that far along in the book when I got this little one here. But the name I originally picked for him just didn't work out, and I was throwing around Atticus as a joke, but we all really liked it. And when he came home, he was so quiet and calm and collected, so we were like, oh, Atticus, perfect. But then it turns out Atticus, was a dead shot and could be tough when he needed it to be, and he could stand his ground when he needed to. And this little man over here is just a ball full of personality that we weren't expecting, so I think it was a good name. He's Atticus Finch. I'm Kalina. This has been Don't Quote Me on That. I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening. Don't quote me on that. One day we'll have an outro, but it's not today.